to me, a witch can take a handful of dirt and get their work done. And I can. And that took me a long time. It wasn't like I started with dirt. I started with the tools and the toys and the trappings of the craft to develop that. But I think the big difference is the witch serves. A magician may or may not serve the greater community. A wizard may or may not serve the greater community, but a witch is here to serve. Witches were the village, well, we're going to make this gender specific in the olden days, witches were the village women who knew about healing with herbs, who knew how to deliver a baby without anybody dying, who knew the seasons of the sun and the moon, so when to plant, when not to plant, and they weren't an integral part of society. They usually sat on the edge. And they usually lived alone. And they usually went crazy at the end of their lives because they had no one to talk to. And so that's where that stereotype of the crazy old hag came from. Nowadays we see less of that because the witch has become more integrated into society. Of course, that's why I don't really demonize all of the media stuff around at the movies, the TV and all of that, because in a way it's made it a little bit easier to be a witch, at least in modern day society, at least on Long Island, on the northern part of the East Coast, yes. But I mean, bottom line to me, a witch, I know that the best day of witchcraft for me is not the day where I'm doing tons of spells, but when I make my rounds. When I go and check in and see how people are doing. When I go to work in Sayville, it takes me half an hour to an hour to get a cup of coffee at Starbucks because I have to stop in and say, hi, how are you doing? Sometimes it's a coffee run, but usually the reason why it should really only take 10 minutes, regardless of the line at Starbucks, but it can take me half an hour to an hour as I check in, how are you doing? Oh, what's going on? And people gossip to me.
Right.
And it's not that I spread the gossip, but it's kind of how you can tell what's going on with people. You can tell when
you get a feel for it. You can see it with your hands.
It's very psychological.
You're tasting what's going on. You're feeling what's the energy.
And that's a witch's art. I don't know that wizards, maybe wizards and magicians do deal with it on that level, but to me the witch is way more social. Where I get the image of a wizard as someone who sort of lives in a tower tinkering away. Working on their alchemical formulas and their astrological configurations and things like that. Where a witch tends to be more on the ground in the community.
Though Merlin, I think, was one who, there are some stories which talk about Merlin who would commune with nature. He actually had gone to a point of what you call the death, mm-hmm. and had come back because he'd sort of gone crazy from being out in the wild himself to acquire the knowledge and then was able to re-solidify it and bring it forward.
And that's why we got to really look at the hermit. The hermit is a very compelling and powerful archetype, but just because you like time alone doesn't make you a hermit. A hermit really needs to withdraw from society in order to rebuild and reconnect. And that's not necessarily part of the witch. Can be. I mean, anybody can have any combination of archetypes within their
But that is
soul.
part of your process as a witch.
Yeah, but I'm not a hermit. I'm not a hermit. I'm online way too much. I'm communicating way too much. I'm too much of a communicator to be a hermit. I have my moments, but I wouldn't really call it a hermitage. When I'm in pain, I tend to reach out. Yes, I will deal with my own stuff. Yes, I will pray and take that time. But I'm not a monastic. I'm not an ascetic. I eat meat. I smoke cigarettes. I have a beer every now and again. Have you tried Blue Moon, by the way? I don't mean to give product placement, but
it's very good.
Blue Moon,
very good.
Very, very good. And their summer ale's really good too. So yeah, I drink. I like a good glass of wine. I'm way too social,
right,
for that. But then again, we have those solitary witches out in the world that no one will ever know they're practicing, for whatever reason. Maybe it is geographical, or maybe it's familial. They can't in their family come out. And that's why I think there are way more witches than people realize. Where I think, as a ceremonial magician, that's pretty private. I don't know anybody who advertises that. I don't know anybody who...
Well, not unless you're in a brotherhood.
Well,
if you're in a brotherhood...
But even then, cloistered.
It is cloistered, but it's not cloistered as to unto just yourself.
Right, yeah.
That can be a
tribal
group thing.
hermitage, if that's not a complete paradox, tribal heritage.
But I think as far as they tend to group together, in brotherhoods.
Well, because there's a lot to remember. I mean, and people, we actually have David W. We call him because we keep his last name private for his own reasons. He's an amazing teacher. He teaches through the Silver Broom Ministries. An amazing teacher of the Golden Dawn and ceremonial magic. I mean, he teaches a pretty basic course. I think it's 11 weeks. Really quite amazing from what I hear. I haven't taken it myself. Really not my cup of tea. But the intricacy of that work, to me, is fascinating. It just doesn't have a pull for me.
Right. You're not drawn.
Not drawn. Where, for me, witchcraft is way more immediate. It seems to me to be a bit more practical in the sense that it's really about helping things along. When somebody comes to me for a spell, which is rare nowadays, once I start teaching spell work, hopefully people will find it as their own personal art form. Rarely do people come to me for spells anymore. It does happen on occasion, but not like it used to. It used to be like, you're a witch, can you do this for me? Can you make them go away? I was like, well, how about we talk about now?
Empowering yourself.
Now it's really more, I mean, I can't take the minister out of the witch for me personally. Not every witch becomes a minister. That's way more than most people are ready to handle with just schedule-wise. But for me, as a minister, I have implemented aspects of the craft to begin moving people away from, let's not banish them to another dimension. How about we work on what's the projection, what's the spiritual lesson? Which is not always necessarily inherent in common modern-day craft. Why did I attract this to myself? Where are my psychological issues? Where is the button inside of me that this person is pushing that I need to deactivate? Because, it may be all well and good to want to banish a next-door neighbor, but what if it's your mother, your father, your lover, your brother, your sister, your husband, your wife?
The karma implications are astounding.
It's tricky. So I think there's just something a bit more boots on the ground with witchcraft than with magicians and wizards. Although, honestly, as far as wizards go, I know some people who call themselves that. And I would say the difference is artistic.
Okay.
Okay? That I don't see so much of a reverence for gods. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yes,
not so much of a religious...
Independent thought as to more of a scientific approach and understanding of the workings of what's going on, where there's more of a spiritualism that goes behind the craft.
Yep. And then again, there are people who are just magic users. They work magic. And they're not necessarily tied or bound to any particular lineage or tradition or cultural reference at all.
Now we're talking about witches again.
I don't even know that they're necessarily witches. They're just people
users
who are using magic. Really, if you want to go there, really large perception, really large perspective, to look at, law of attraction is magic. And magic is the law of attraction. It really is about ask and allow. It really is. It's really using the power of the mind, which is why I always found it so interesting that people use that term New Age, because all of the principles that I learned in the New Age are all based in ancient forms of mysticism.
It's just new to us.
Like we created the chakra system. Come on. Like we invented prayer. Oh yes, we light candles to make things happen. Oh, that's new. It's as old as the hills.
Well, Tony, thank you for throwing that question.
Thanks for the question.
up.
Good question.